and find out how much time I have, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman has 3 minutes remaining.
Let me quickly mention that we must stop the violence of guns. When we think about 5,740 children being killed by guns, I'd like, again, for this Congress to look at 2812, which is a bill that deals with stand your ground that we have not addressed from the Trayvon Martin. And I'd like them also to quickly look at gun safety and gun access prevention, H.R. 65. I find that a way of being able to come together and keeping guns out of the hands of underage children and teaching gun safety to parents and children. I want to also join with my colleague on the Foreign Affairs Committee and mention human trafficking is a major issue. It will be commemorated on January 11th, but I will be hosting with the Homeland Security Committee a hearing on human trafficking in Houston, Texas. Quickly, I want to make mention of the Congressional Gold Medal that I have for Malala, who is a voice of strength, a young teenager gunned and shot. I wouldn't say gunned down because she lives in Pakistan, only because she wanted girls to have education. I asked my colleagues to join myself and Ileana Roth-Lathan to ensure that we do have, if you will, the honor of presenting this to her, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, spoke before the United Nations, and I hope that we will do that. Let me close, Mr. Speaker, by mentioning just 2 quick things, and that is, let us not forget our veterans, enormously important, and let us also move quickly for NSA reforms. As a member of the Judiciary Committee that helped write the Patriot Act, Section 215, that was not our interpretation. That was not legislative history for trolling mega data collection. We can be safe and secure, and we will be presenting a briefing on privacy and security next week in the Judiciary Committee, 2226, at 10:30. I hope all of the colleagues will come, but I have introduced legislation to make sure that there is a people's advocate in the FISA court, but more importantly that we restrain and find a way to restrain the mega collection. And I hope the President, in the reports that he has just received, will be able to do that as well. Let me also indicate that internationally, I think this Congress should deal with where we are in Syria and where we are in South Sudan, 2 places that I am concerned about the human cost, if you will. We have a lot to do, Mr. Speaker. I just gave just small bits this evening, but we have a lot to do that we can do together in a bipartisan manner. And we can look at the Affordable Care Act just as a point in closing, because it's been so divisive, and look at it that it's working. People want insurance. We can do that. And we can make sure that as we do so, Mr. Speaker, then America will see us working together. That's what I'd like to see happening. I've given an array of an agenda that touches the lives of people. Let's get to work. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time has expired. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Mrs. Bachmann, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As always, it's a privilege to be able to come to the well of the House of Representatives, the greatest deliberative body in the history of the world, to be here and have the opportunity to bring a voice to the table and to speak to the American people as well as my constituents in the 6th District of Minnesota. I want to join my colleagues in wishing Happy New Year to all the people in the United States. We look forward to a wonderful year in 2014. There are so many things that are good that we can look forward to this year, so many things that this body can get done that we can agree on. We can agree on our veterans, standing for them, thanking them, first of all, that tonight as we are here in this chamber, we have men and women across the globe who are laying their lives on the line for us. Our prayers are with you, and our prayers are with your families. And so, Mr. Speaker, I know that I speak for you and all of our colleagues to let our troops know there is nothing more important than the work that you do to secure our liberty and our freedom, and we're for you, and we'll be standing here for you this year as we have in the past. We also stand together in recognition that the first and greatest obligation of all of us as members of Congress in this chamber is to secure the safety and security of the American people, the welfare of the American people, Mr. Speaker. We do that here domestically, but our obligation is to make sure that our national security is held safe here in the homeland, but also our vital American national security interests across the globe. To that end, several of my colleagues and myself took a fact-finding trip in December after we had concluded our work in December. We went into the Middle East. We took a very extensive journey. This was no pleasure trip in any way. This was a working mission. We went first into Amsterdam. We met an individual who has one of the most extensive collections while we were there of communist penetration throughout the world. It was very interesting as we dialogued with him at communist infiltration, what that has meant over the course of history, particularly over the last century, and what that means for Americans today. From there, we journeyed into Cairo, Egypt. While we were there, we spoke with leaders of Egypt. There's been a tremendous change that has occurred. And we know that literally in just something over a week's time, people in Egypt will have an opportunity to go to the ballot box and vote in a referendum on a brand new constitution. The very brief recent history of Egypt is that there was an overthrow in Egypt of the Mubarak presidency, which had been stable for some 30-plus years. The people of Egypt spoke. They were very unhappy with their government. There was a referendum that was occurred, and during that time the Muslim Brotherhood came to power through the President Morsi. The Muslim Brotherhood, through the Freedom and Justice Party, established a new regime. So repulsed were the people of Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood and their tactics during the course of just something over a year that the people of Egypt took to the streets. Some 33 million people in what some people say was the largest human demonstration ever in the history of the world, because the people of Egypt were outraged at the atrocities and the extremism of the Muslim Brotherhood as they were displayed across Egypt. Really, so much of this so-called Arab Spring has been the persecution of Christians, religious minorities, and women, particularly in the Middle East region. And nowhere has this been felt more than in Egypt. And the people rose up. You see, in the Egyptian constitution as put together by the Muslim Brotherhood, there was no avenue for the people to remove the Muslim Brotherhood president, Morsi. There was no impeachment process like we have in the United States. The only option available to the people was to go into the streets and demonstrate and seek the removal of the Muslim Brotherhood president. That's what the people effectuated. In that time, there is now an interim president. His name is President Mansour. I've met with him numerous times in Cairo. We've had very good conversations with interim President Mansour. He told me in Egypt, together with my colleagues, he will not be seeking re-election. We also met with General al-Sisi, the head of the military in Egypt, trying to maintain order in that country. We heard some very good news. And, Mr. Speaker, among the news that we heard while we were in Egypt was this, that Egypt enjoys the most favorable relationship with the Jewish state of Israel that they have had in over 35 years. The Obama administration asked Egypt to work harder in the Sinai. That's the border, Mr. Speaker, between Egypt and Israel. The Obama administration asked the Egyptian government to work to clear out al-Qaeda and to try and secure that border. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, the Muslim Brotherhood instead had been placing more attacks through using al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda elements in various flavors. When you think of the old phrase of Baskin-Robbins and 28 flavors of ice cream, there's multiple flavors, if you will, Mr. Speaker, of al-Qaeda. There's the al-Nusra Front. There's Islamah al-Jama. There's one organization after another, but they share the same ideology. Much of this ideology makes its way through an organization called the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood was actively facilitating attacks on Israel through tunnels ruled by Hamas, which is essentially another affiliate, a franchise of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Gaza region. And so whether it was weapons, whether it was attacks, whether it was fighters, Israel had its hands full in the Sinai border. Now, the good news is that General al-Sisi, Interim President Mansour in Egypt, took to heart the request from the Obama administration and for their own survival worked to take apart the al-Qaeda network and the strength that there was of jihadist-based fighters on the Sinai, and they've been incredibly successful. And I'm pleased to report to you, Mr. Speaker, tonight that what we heard from the leadership in Egypt is that over 70% of the tunnels and over 70% of the jihadist activity on the Sinai has been silenced, deconstructed, taken apart. That means that Israel has had a better time, a more peaceful time on its border, but also this has helped the Egyptian government as well. Because the Nile River in Egypt is kind of a dividing point. You have Western Egypt, you have Eastern Egypt. Eastern Egypt being the more violent, where it's been essentially labeled a Wild West, if you will, in the Sinai. That's been very difficult for securing peace in the Middle East, very difficult for Israel. But we have to thank the current interim government under the leadership of President Mansour and under the guidance of General al-Sisi in the Sinai region. That's the good news. Of all of the turmoil and all of the chaos that there is today in the Middle East, this is our bright and shining spot. And the United States, in my opinion, needs to do everything that we can to encourage and foster peace in this region. As I believe that my colleagues, whether it's on the Democrat side, on the Republican side, whether it's in the House, whether it's in the Senate, this is something that we agree upon. We want to see peace in the Middle East, peace in the largest Muslim country or Arab country in the Middle East, which would be Egypt, but also peace in the Jewish state of Israel. And this is the place to forge that peace. And the good news is to hear on this very sensitive border, we're seeing the Egyptians working together to make sure that there can be peace to fight a common enemy, and that would be the al-Qaeda and the radical elements in this regime. That's good news. We went from Cairo, Egypt, where we heard very good news from General al-Sisi, very good news from Albert Musa, who is heading the Committee of 50 that is writing the new constitution that the people of Egypt will be voting on in the referendum on January 14th and January 15th. I believe the people of Egypt will see the wisdom in this new constitution, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, does have a provision for impeachment, so people in Egypt in the future have an opportunity now to be able to change their president in their country. And they also guarantee freedom of belief in Egypt. And also they have a dedication to rebuilding the houses of worship that were destroyed by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood destroyed shops, homes, and places of worship of Coptic Christians in Egypt. And the government is committed to rebuilding the Christian houses of worship in Egypt. This is a wonderful advancement for peace and for tolerance in that region of the world, and one that I think we should encourage and get behind. From there, my colleagues and I, this was a delegation that was led by Representative Steve King of Iowa. Also in attendance was Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas and also Representative Robert Pittenger of North Carolina. From there, we went on to Beirut, Lebanon, which has been a hotbed of violence. because Iran has seen an avenue of advancement. And through working through the terrorist organization Hezbollah, Iran has been bringing increased terror between Sunni and Shia in southern Lebanon. We flew into the airport at Beirut. The airport at Beirut is controlled by Hezbollah. There we met with the ambassador, we met with leaders of political parties. And it is devastating to hear what they have to say about the increased violence. A suicide bomber wearing a vest detonated that vest during our time when we were there. Obviously, we weren't anywhere nearby. We weren't in any form of danger, but a vest was detonated. 4 people were killed. Also, a soldier had shot into Israel and had killed an Israeli soldier during the time that we were there. Very, very strong increased violence. Violence occurred prior to our entry. Violence continues to occur, and there are now new reports, Mr. Speaker, of Iran bringing even more dangerous, larger, deadly weapons into that area, bringing again to the fore the increase in fighting between Sunni and Shia. That's the kind of pressure that the Jewish state of Israel is looking at on its northern border, without even contemplating what's happening in Syria. Syria, Mr. Speaker, has completely fallen apart. It's complete chaos now, with Assad having estimated to have killed over 200,000 of his own people, but now the so-called moderate who were being backed, led by General Idris. General Idris has now reportedly left Syria, and the extremist elements, including al-Qaeda, of the Islamist jihadist regime is now fighting against Assad. So we have 2 very bad options in Syria today. And very recently, these Islamist jihadist fighters took over a weapons cache, a very dangerous weapons, and they now have control of those weapons. Where do we go from here in Syria? It's a very, very difficult question. We have such utter chaos that Lebanon now is the recipient of the greatest number of Syrian refugees on a daily basis. So we have the tension of Palestinian refugees who have gone into Lebanon. We have Iran, who has its presence through Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, very agitated. Some estimates are as high as 100,000 missiles are located in people's homes, in schools, in nurseries, in nursing homes, embedded in civilian areas right on Israel's northern border. Utter, complete breakdown and chaos in Syria. Then you have all of the tension in Iraq, with increasing battles going on, again, between Sunni and Shia in Iraq. Iraq, at one point, had been fairly close to being secured by American presence. It has now utterly fallen apart. There continue to be attacks by the Taliban. A new report just came in that the Taliban presumably is responsible for 6 Americans that were killed in December. We have Karzai, the head of Afghanistan, who is not willing to agree to the final settlement terms in Afghanistan to have aid and U.S. presence, despite the fact that the United States supplies something like 95% of the economy in Afghanistan, and this is the thanks we're getting out of Afghanistan. We have that kind of tension and pressure, together with numerous prisons where the worst of the worst Islamist thug, al-Qaeda flavor jihadists have been let out of prisons, going into Syria, and from Syria, who knows where, again adding to the pressure on Israel. And at the same time, we have what in my mind was the very dangerous P5+1 agreement dealing with Iran and dealing with trying to prevent or at least stop or at least freeze in place Iran's nuclear program, which all of the world knows will be meant to give Iran a nuclear weapon and the missile delivery systems capable of delivering those weapons against Israel, against Western Europe, and against the United States. This is the greatest threat that the world faces today, a nuclear Iran. And even while we are here in this chamber tonight, Mr. Speaker, many people think that the 6-month freeze is on tonight. That when President Obama went to the microphone, it was about a little after 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night, to announce with vigor that we had concluded this agreement with Iran and we will now have a 6-month freeze. That 6-month period hasn't even started yet. No one knows when that 6-month period of a so-called freeze will even start. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying, quite frankly, is that as we're standing in this chamber tonight, Iran continues to enrich uranium for a nuclear weapon. They're enriching it to 20%. That's not a small amount. It may sound small. That's a huge leap towards weapons-grade uranium. They continue to install centrifuges. They have new generation centrifuges that can spin to enrich uranium 6 times faster than the current generation. Iran hasn't given up 1 ounce of its storage of enriched uranium. They haven't stopped their research and development on their delivery systems of their missiles. They haven't stopped research and development on the warheads that would go on the tips of missiles to deliver a nuclear bomb. They haven't stopped the production on the facility of plutonium at Iraq. That continues going on. Nothing has stopped. In fact, the only thing we have heard from Iran is from the Iranian leadership. The parliament has said, why don't we start enriching to 60%? You see, weapons grade is 90%. Why don't we up it even further? That's what the parliament is saying today, after the agreement was signed. The mullahs, the religious leaders that effectively control Iran, are saying that this agreement means nothing to them. As a matter of fact, the leader of Iran said that they won't change 1 iota of their nuclear program. You see, it's very interesting. I think that when madmen speak, the world should listen. And Iran is acting in a way that is indicative of any madman of all time. It is currently Iran. And what their plan is to have domination across the world by the use of nuclear weapons to wipe millions of innocent people off the map, beginning with the Jewish state of Israel. You see, about 80% of the people that live in Israel travel to the greater Tel Aviv area for their employment. It doesn't take much imagination to see how easy it would be for Iran to send multiple nuclear missiles and virtually wipe out the Jewish state of Israel. But let us never think, as Iran calls Israel the little Satan, Iran calls the United States the great Satan. And we should never delude ourselves to think that this is a Middle East-only problem. It isn't, Mr. Speaker. I wish I could say it was. This is a problem that the world must deal with. And during the course of our travels in December, for the week that we were in the Middle East, we were very disturbed by what we heard by various leaders. As a matter of fact, there was one leader that we met with in Lebanon during our time there in that very dangerous area. It was so dangerous, as a matter of fact, that this leader, about a year earlier, had been shot. There were 3 snipers. He pointed over a wall. They had to build a wall around his house. He's now confined to his house, and the compound around his house is too dangerous for him to even leave. There were 3 snipers about a mile away that took a shot at him while he was in his backyard. He almost lost his life, and now he's confined to his backyard. And this is what he had to say to us, Mr. Speaker, when we were there. He told us, unfortunately, in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been virtually no U.S. leadership in the Middle East. That's reminiscent of what we heard the former leader Lech Walesa of Poland tell the world, that the United States is no longer the political leader nor the moral leader of the world, that we have effectively walked off the world stage, and that the world needs the leadership of the United States. We heard that repeated by this leader in Lebanon. He also told us, he said that the opinion of the United States has gone down dramatically in the Middle East. He said he has a brother who's in the United States, and it's been a shock for his brother, very intelligent individual in the United States, a shock to see how the United States has failed to respond to the rise of Islamic jihadist activity in the Middle East and how it is negatively impacting United States national security. He said there is no strategy. There is no outlook. It seems to be that the United States just acts day to day, no strategy. Shouldn't our strategy be the security and safety of the American people? Shouldn't our aim be securing American vital interests in the Middle East, standing with the best ally we have in the world, the Jewish state of Israel? And yet the Middle East doesn't have any idea what our strategy is, because they're telling us it looks like it's ad hoc, day to day. He said, I'm telling you this as a friend. He said, prior, there were no Russians in the Middle East, no Russian influence and presence. He said now the Russians have strengthened and have a very strong presence in the Middle East. He said it's been very frustrating in the last 2 or 3 years. He said the Saudi Arabians have long been our friends, friends of the United States, but they have, the Saudi Arabians, he said, no longer seem to trust the United States. He said the P5+1 agreement has made Iran stronger than ever before. And he told us that Iran is Hezbollah. And so he is facing things from Hezbollah every day. He said that there is more money available for Hezbollah because we have decreased, we've essentially lifted sanctions on Iran. All this has done is free up money so more money can go to the terrorist organization Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that is being used to hurt Israel as well. Well, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Bahrain, whether it's Saudi Arabia, all of these countries are wondering what in the world the United States is doing, because what they are saying to us is that things are much worse on the ground in the Middle East. As the Iranians have only turned their burner off temporarily, they can turn it back on again. And I quote from him, "This makes Iran stronger than ever, stronger in the Middle East." That's what we heard, Mr. Speaker, on the ground from leaders in Lebanon, that Iran has been strengthened through this failed P5+1 agreement. From Lebanon, Mr. Speaker, we went down to Tripoli, Libya, to get some answers on Benghazi and get some answers on what the P5+1 agreement will mean in Libya. Well, what we heard is that we spoke with the Prime Minister in Libya, we spoke with leaders of the Justice Department and the Foreign Minister as well. I asked them specifically about Benghazi. I asked them, why was our FBI prevented from going into Libya, specifically to Benghazi, to conduct an investigation for 4 or 5 weeks after the terrible tragedy on September 11th? And the response that we received was that this was a great insult to Libya when this attack occurred, and that this was an attack against Libya and the Libyan people. Now, this compound that was attacked in Benghazi is considered sovereign American soil. This attack, when Chris Stevens, our ambassador, was killed and the 3 other Americans, brave Americans, were killed, this was an attack on America, on our compound, on our ambassador, on our American soldiers. This was an attack against us, not on Libya, against us. There was absolutely no reason why the Libyan government prevented our FBI from coming in on our sovereign territory and conducting an investigation. Journalists were inside. We know that CNN picked up the ambassador's diaries and walked out with the ambassador's diaries. Other sensitive information was on the ground. People came in and walked away with it. But the FBI couldn't get in. This is the only ambassador in 30 years to be killed. And we couldn't get in to find out what in the world happened, ask people, figure out what's going on. It's been over a year. We still don't know who, what, where, when, how, why, and how much were we prevented from knowing because we were kept out of that country for 4 and 5 weeks. It was wrong. And I told that to the leadership in Libya when we were there. It was wrong. That needs to be rectified. We demand and we expect full cooperation in getting to the bottom of Benghazi. That must be done. And that's a bipartisan issue. That's not a partisan issue. Well, from Libya, we traveled up to Israel, where we met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Defense Secretary. We were extremely grateful for the time that we had there. Again, there's no question. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, told us that it was the worst day in 10 years when the P5+1 agreement was struck. The worst day in 10 years. No one will be more negatively impacted by a nuclear Iran than the Jewish state of Israel. Wouldn't you think it would be wise for the United States and for the great nations of the world to listen to the concerns of the lamb that is on the slaughtering block when they say, wait a minute, this is the worst thing we could do, the P5+1 agreement, because this will not prevent, this will not stop Iran from getting a nuclear bomb? That was confirmed on this most recent trip when we were with the Prime Minister. He's very concerned about that. He's also very concerned about the International Criminal Court as well, and the fact that Israel will soon be drawn in to the criminal court. There could be actions of taking the United States in. We want to be under U.S. law. And we need to maintain the United States as a sovereign nation and our American people subject only to United States sovereign law. We don't want the American people subject to some international court. The American people must now and for always only be subject to the American courts, because only here will we be allowed to enjoy the protections under the Constitution that we have today. That will not happen under an international criminal court. From Israel, we traveled and went on up to Vienna, where we met with the International Atomic Energy Agency. This agency is tasked with overseeing the P5+1 agreement with Iran. We appreciated our time in Vienna. We appreciated being able to speak with those who were present to talk about the process, what they will do. But I will tell you, on behalf of my colleagues, we didn't leave with a sense that we could have complete trust in knowing that the IAEA, while they will perform their jobs, that they will be able to completely appreciate when and if Iran decides to move into the creation of a nuclear weapon. That's something that we can't get wrong. Where do we go if that's wrong? And, Mr. Speaker, if I could ask, how much time remains?
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate that, and thank you for allowing me time to relate some of my concerns that we heard on our recent trip to the Middle East, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have that in front. The question is, I move that the House do now adjourn, Mr. Speaker.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
The House today approved a bill expanding the role of the states in managing Superfund environmental cleanup sites. The House is back in session tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. Two bills tomorrow, both dealing with the healthcare.gov website. The first requires the government to notify anyone whose personal information is released in the event of a data breach. The other bill would require the executive branch to update Congress and the public about the use of healthcare.gov and report problems Americans encounter on the website. Follow the House live here on C-SPAN.